Another resignation, a new prime minister, but Sri Lanka's protests continue. The island nation is battling its worst economic crisis in decades. Demonstrators are demanding a government overhaul, but with a defiant president, will they ever get their wish? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Sri Lanka. One by one, the Rajapaksas are resigning. Basil, the president's brother and former finance minister, left parliament last week, the second family member to quit in the space of 1 month.
Sri Lanka Parliament.
I have handed over the resignation letter as a member of parliament to the Secretary General of Parliament. Therefore, I'm addressing you as an ordinary citizen.
His resignation comes as Sri Lanka faces the worst economic crisis since its independence. Food and fuel are scarce and power cuts are common. And with these problems come protests. Demonstrations are almost as frequent as the blackouts themselves. And the demands are similar too.
Enough is enough. In my grandfather's time, my mother's time, lots of problems are faced, and I think the future has to change. The future of Sri Lanka has to change immediately, before it's too late.
And people are struggling, and the poverty line, I mean, the poor has become poorer, and the middle class has become poor. And the people are expecting this government to do only one thing: get out, get to the countries that we all have invested and give us our money back. That's it.
But the Rajapaksas are still ultimately in control. Gotabaya remains president despite persistent calls to step down. The only arguable change he's made is to appoint a familiar face to serve as prime minister and minister of finance. Last month, Ranil Wickremesinghe began serving a 6th term as Sri Lankan PM. It was hoped his experience in government would take the country out of crisis, but the task is massive. And many think he'll only make a bad situation even worse.
We know very clearly Ranil Wickremesinghe is a member of that family. He's a family member and a very good friend of Rajapaksa family. So we never believe he will do the justice for the people. We don't believe that. However, he has a chance to do that. If he is in the side of people, he can prove that he's with us by doing the justice to the people, by arresting Rajapaksa and all these terrorists.
So what will it take to, at the very least, ease Sri Lanka's dire situation? Well, the Prime Minister says the country needs $5 billion over the next 6 months just to ensure basic living standards. But they also need fuel fast, and Wickremesinghe seems willing to go to a controversial source to get it.
We need the fuel, and now we are negotiating with private suppliers. It's not that we go and buy anything, it's the private suppliers who give us oil, and we buy it from them. So part of it, the issue here is that there's a lot of oil going around which can be sourced back informally to Iran or to Russia. So sometimes you may not know what oil you are buying, but we are looking at other sources of oil, fuel that are traditional sources from the Middle East, where we've been taking, where we have been purchasing fuel.
I mean, it seems like you still need more fuel, so would you consider?
We will, yes. If we can get from any other sources, we'll get from there, otherwise they may have to go to Russia again.
So with Sri Lanka still very much in crisis, what will it take to get the country back to stability? To discuss that, let's get straight to our panel now, all joining us from Colombo, starting with Aruna Kulatunga. He is a former advisor to the Ministry of Primary Industries. Prashan De Visser is an activist and the founder of Sri Lanka Unites. And Ahilan Kadirgamar is a senior lecturer in the Department of Sociology at the University of Jaffna. Thanks all so much for being with us. Let's start with this $5 billion the Prime Minister says is needed just to cover basic needs in the short term. Aruna, let me ask you first, how hopeful are you that at least that can be secured, and from whom?
not in the short term. It is highly unlikely that we can get any money in the short term until we prove to the donor countries, plus the ISB holders, the international bond holders, that we are genuinely now restructuring and that we will show some ability to pay this money back. And that will come only after the IMF does their staff surveys, does the background work on this. And that's going to take around a minimum of 6 months to happen. So in the interim, we have asked for what we are calling bridging finance or the rapid financing facility. And there might be about $1 billion, $1.5 billion that might come from that. But we are not, it's not optimistic at all. We are looking at, in the short term, we are looking at a fairly bleak picture.
Do you think you can at least avoid the worst case scenario, at least in the short term? Should that bridging finance come through? Or can Sri Lankans expect ever worse to come, which is almost unthinkable at this point?
To be honest, I think we have a little bit more further to go on the downside. Especially in the next 1 month, there will be more shortages in terms of fuel. The food shortage will hit us July, August, and then things will start to smooth out again. But we are looking in the very short term, in the next 2 months, it's not going to be so good at all. I mean, we are surviving at the moment. And as you say, 1 month downwards, it's not going to be a good picture. We are not going to starve. There is no starvation in this country. We have, Sri Lanka is a very green country. There is various different kinds of foods available. This has happened to us before. We have gone through similar situations before. So the older generation remembers what happened in the 70s and what happened to us in the 89, early 90s. So there will be a food shock that we have to go through. There's already, we are experienced the fuel shock at the moment. Today, I have no petrol. I cannot go back to the area that I come from today unless I have to stay in a petrol queue, and that might be 9 hours, 10 hours, who knows? Because no delivery, there has been no delivery of petrol stations. So it will get worse.
Right. Okay. Let me turn to Prashan and ask if you actually share Aruna's outlook. And as far as the government is concerned at this point, I mean, is Ranil Wickremesinghe actually the man for the job right now? He may not be loved, we know, but can he get the necessary done?
Well, I do agree on the fact that, unfortunately, more bleaker days are ahead of us. The food crisis looms over, and like was mentioned, July onwards, things will be challenging. And yeah, I don't think the government has solutions right now. They've run out of tricks. And when speaking of the Prime Minister, yes, many, many years ago, he might have been in his heyday, may have had more credibility, may have had more respect in the international arena. But unfortunately, I feel that has all faded away due to multiple compromises over the years. And he didn't come. He made a mockery of the democracy by a person who was rejected at the polls very clearly, coming in through a nationalist seat, violating all practices of his own party, where if you are a defeated candidate, you cannot lay claims to a national seat, and then eking into a prime ministership during a time like this has caused even more of a challenge. Yes, he's experienced, but I think his credibility has been tarnished, and even the international community communicating with him, there isn't that conviction that they had many years ago. And that is hurting us more right now.
Right. But is there, Prashan, a better alternative in your mind?
I think that if there was time for, first of all, the president has to step down. A lot of this crisis is a result of the president and his administration, many bad decisions that they made. We were already in a difficult position, and so they have to step down. Now, if they don't, the only probable way was to have a truly coalition government come into play. But Mr. Wickremesinghe was too quick to rush in to grab a premiership to gain some sort of political credibility to what he had lost, that he destroyed that possibility of a true coalition, and to actually go to the international community as a stronger front, saying here is a collective group who is competent, who is able to deliver, who is honest, who will stamp down on corruption, Instead, we've just got another puppet kind of barrier against the allegations against the Rajapaksa family and bringing true reform to the system right now.
Okay. I do want to ask more about the future, or what you think the future may be for Gotabaya Rajapaksa as well as Wickremesinghe. But first, I want to ask Ahilan what you think the realistic options now are in the short term still to just keep basic needs provided for. Fuel, for example. Is Russia, for example, a source that can help? Because yes, it can discount its fuel, but Moscow is not in a position to give charity, especially to a country that's not considered a massive ally, like Sri Lanka.
Yeah, first of all, I think the situation, as the other panelists mentioned, is really bleak. And even the food crisis has hit a point where people are, in many rural areas only having 1 or 2 meals a day. So it has already led to a lot of shortages, and this is the worst economic crisis that we are facing. So we are in a kind of an emergency situation. And in that kind of a situation, we should be trying to get any kind of support from anyone to be able to get the essential goods. An economy can't run without fuel. Fuel is important, but so are medicines. A lot of food, wheat flour prices here have gone up, where the price of bread has tripled. So it's really pricing people out of food. So we have to get that kind of support. Now, the Prime Minister's call for $5 billion in bridge financing, because the IMF agreement is going to take time. And to be honest, I don't think the IMF agreement is going to solve our problems. It might give us some credit, but given the global conditions, it's going to be very difficult for Sri Lanka to go again and borrow in the international markets, because the Federal Reserve is increasing interest rates. So and Sri Lanka having defaulted, it's going to be very difficult to get that kind of credit going forward. So Sri Lanka is appealing to India, to China, to anybody who would support us. At the same time, what we have to do is we need to create a public distribution system. The market is clearly going to fail in a time like this, and that's what we're seeing with all the queues out on the street. The state has to take responsibility for importing whatever goods they can with the foreign earnings we get. Now, if you look at the central bank data, every month we are getting about 1.3, 1.4 billion US dollars in export earnings and foreign remittances. Now, all of that has to be taken hold by the state to be able to import these kinds of essential goods. But the Sri Lankan government is still mixed. It doesn't have a clear direction. As Prashan said, it doesn't even have a proper leadership. To get us out of this kind of a crisis, we need a strong and new leadership, and a leadership that has legitimacy. The president has lost all legitimacy. He has to resign and he has to go. And him appointing a prime minister who had no legitimacy to start with, how are we going to mobilize our people out of this crisis? We are seeing that production is completely coming to a stop. Even farmers have stopped producing after the disaster of a fertilizer ban last year. So we are looking at a very serious food crisis. This is the worst crisis we've been since the 1930s. We are really ill prepared to handle this. I'm really worried about famine type conditions in the year ahead, unless we quickly start to make amends.
Everyone seems to agree that Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Wickremesinghe both seem to be ill-equipped to manage a crisis, which many say is actually of their creation. But do you think, Ahilan, that Sri Lankans should be concerned about the potential now for the government to arguably compromise Sri Lanka's future to those other parties that can create the financing that Sri Lanka is in desperate need of right now, be it China and/or Russia and/or India, in order to get its economy back on track? Is there the potential for Sri Lanka to, in a sense, kind of sell its future to these financing countries?
There is that danger. At the same time, we are facing an emergency and a food emergency. The IMF recently said that they think Sri Lanka's economy, its GDP, is going to go into negative growth, negative minus 6.5% growth. We've never had this in our history. I think it's going to be even worse than that. As I mentioned, production has completely been disrupted. So we need oil, we need inputs, we need fertilizers, and we are right now beggars, and beggars can't be choosers. So we have to be very vigilant that our important sovereign assets are not sold or compromised at this time. At the same time, we have to make this appeal to international donors. And whatever income that we get, we are still getting about $1 billion a month in foreign earnings from our exports. We are getting anywhere between 300 to 400 million US dollars in foreign remittances. Those have to be prioritized. The government still doesn't have a program like that. What they're doing is that they're giving that foreign exchange to commercial banks which are giving them as lines of credit for importers, but they are not prioritizing the essential goods that we need. And so keeping this fiction that the market is functioning is really undermining us.
Okay, let me come back to Aruna then. I could see you did not disagree with a lot of what you heard there. So I think you all agree that the IMF doesn't have the magic wand to just solve all the problems, but it is a player here that will need to help Sri Lanka recover. But the basic demand from the Sri Lankan population, most of the population at least, is that the government, Gotabaya Rajapaksa and maybe Wickremesinghe as collateral, resign. Do you think the IMF at this point holds some kind of leverage over what happens politically in Sri Lanka in order to get the ball moving forward with a government in power that foreign donors will better trust?
Okay, let me first correct two statements that were made. In the first one, we need to understand that Wickremesinghe actually did not rush into this. He was, for the last, since 2019, continuously, Wickremesinghe had been saying that this is going to happen. Myself has been saying it for a while now, that this is going to happen. We are going into a pretty bad situation. So Wickremesinghe was fully aware of what the situation that he was would be faced with if he took on this task of bringing us out of the whole situation as we are now. So he was asked last. Before he was asked, the present leader of the opposition was asked. He refused to take the post, and then the deputy leader of the opposition or the party leader of the opposition was asked, and he refused as well. So at the end, Singh was asked, and he believes, and he's fairly confident that he has the necessary background and the connections and the international recognition that can turn this around. Now, I must say, you have to give him some time because this has just been 2 months into this that he has taken power, not 2 months. And I'm actually sitting at the Prime Minister's office, you can see from behind me. And there was a meeting just minutes ago before this interview started with the Korean embassy. So we are continuously meeting with the foreign delegations, much more. I mean, I'm not sure whether Ahilan is also aware today. There was a meeting between the Chinese ambassador to Sri Lanka and the US ambassador to Sri Lanka, which is very rare. I mean, these ambassadors don't meet like that in
Just quickly, Ahilan, are you hearing something false in that statement? I see you're disagreeing.
Yeah, no, I mean, Ranil Wickremesinghe has been Prime Minister 5 times. The last time he was in power as Prime Minister, the public perception is that he actually helped save the Rajapaksas for them to return. And his appointment now, at a time when there was pressure mounting on the president to resign, is seen widely here as a measure to save the Rajapaksas. That's the public perception. Now, there are international actors who might be supportive of Ranil Wickremesinghe's appointment, the United States and other larger powers, but this is about Sri Lankans and what the Sri Lankan people want. And if you have to get out of this crisis, you have to be able to lead the Sri Lankan people. And neither President Gotabaya Rajapaksa nor Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe have the credibility with the people to lead them out of this crisis.
Okay.
Of course, we need international support, but that alone cannot solve such a crisis.
Right. I mean, Aruna, you had agreed that there really is very... Sorry, Aruna. I think your sound cut for a minute. I mean, you would seem to agree that there are very few options to fill this very difficult void to fill. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the question is, okay, whatever that Ahilan is saying, if we take it at face value, who's next? Who is going to take this over and run with it?
Okay. Yeah, very quickly then, Ahilan, do you have an alternative? I mean, are elections even an option of any sort whatsoever?
We might have to consider elections if we can't find a leadership within the current setup. But with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa continuing in office, people have no confidence whatsoever. So the first thing is that he has to resign. And then within Parliament, they have to figure out an interim government to be able to stabilize the country politically and economically. And just 2 days ago, the Federation of University Teachers Association, of which I'm also part of, all the universities are represented, we put forward proposals for economic and political stabilization. And our view is that the president has to resign, and we have to have a credible interim government acceptable to the people. Without that, this crisis is going to be prolonged. It's going to continue, because when the government has no legitimacy, there's no message to the people. As I mentioned, farmers have stopped producing. Who are they looking for to be able to give them the support and guarantee that they can continue with production? So we are caught in this situation. And if all that doesn't work, we would have no option but to go to elections. I don't think that's the immediate option. I think we can explore many other options before that. But at some point, we will have to go for elections. My own sense is that we need to bring about a bit more stability, where people have the time to be able to elect a new leadership.
Right. I want to give equal time. So, Prashan, we just have a few minutes left. I mean, perhaps an interim government makes sense, but it might be easier said than done. And now there is some question as to how far Gotabaya Rajapaksa will actually go to stay in power, and how desperately he might be trying to hang on and to not have to leave his family's legacy actually in tatters. What do you see then politically as the options going forward?
Well, the pressure against the Rajapaksa regime needs to continue. And I know the citizens across the country are demanding that. And Mr. Wickremesinghe coming into the premiership, once again, all those suspicions of him working to protect the Rajapaksas are revived once again. He's just there stepping in. Yes, everybody was talking about this 2 years ago, that the crisis was coming, especially in the last year, given a lot of the bad decisions made. But Mr. Wickremesinghe was truly in a hurry to get there. But what I do say is, if there was opportunity there, with the public pressure growing, with the momentum that was there was a true opportunity for all the major oppositions to come together and find allies within the former regime and create a strong government, at least what we can hold on till the next election. That process was entirely destroyed by a person with no credibility in the parliament or outside the parliament, and now appears internationally as well. Now, if he was able to wave a magic wand and get the international community to come alongside and help us and solve these issues, like some of his supporters said, then that's a different story. But no one has come knocking at our door saying we want to help, further proving that the man's lost his legitimacy even outside our borders.
Aruna, let me give you just a quick 30 seconds. I can see you disagree. Please do wrap in about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
I wouldn't say that Wickremesinghe is not being received internationally. And I'm going to repeat myself. He was thrust into it. He was asked, and he came in. All the others refused. We have no options. Remember this, Ahilan, as well. If the president resigns today, it will be the prime minister, Mr. Wickremesinghe, who would be the president. And maybe you may not want that either. So we have to look at how constitutionally this can be resolved. And I completely agree. I completely agree that there has to be an interim government. if this whole situation is going to come to some kind of resolution. I don't think the 21st Amendment is really going to happen.
Okay.
Personally, that's my personal view. So there will be interim government that will come through, and I believe there are a major effort being taken right now between parties and the government to look at how we can do this.
Aruna
This is
Kulatunga,
information.
I'm going to have to interrupt it there. Very unfortunately, we are completely out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. I'd like to thank sincerely all three of our panelists so much for being with us. Fascinating discussion. Our viewers, of course, for being with us as well. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.